Welcome, friends, to another chapter of Mad Bear. Today we are reading Chapter 7, Those Who Care. It's not a matter of saving our own necks. It's a matter of being aware and being helpful. I stayed in New York through November and into December and flew back home to California in time to spend Christmas with our Japanese community family. Ever since Hiro and Yoko, the young couple who had lived with me during the Rolling Thunder days, had returned home to Fukuoka City, I had shared my San Francisco Bay Area home with a never-ending chain of friends from Japan. It was like a revolving family. Some of them stayed only a few weeks or months and then returned to Japan or moved away. But many of them stayed on while others arrived to add to our number. Friends told friends and some left Japan and headed directly to our address. It was a place to be with peers, to learn English, and to find help and support for their new affairs. Thus our number had grown, and we had spread out to several apartments, becoming a family of neighbors. I spent most of the holiday season working on our cross-tribal Native American communication project. I recalled Mad Bear's urging. Time was short, he had insisted, and he was restless, as he had put it, and anxious to hit the road. My job was to outline a plan and a budget for the cross-tribal survey of records and prophecies with which he wanted to initiate the project and to attempt to raise the necessary funds. But I needed details. I understood the goals, essentially, the purpose and the plans as Mad Bear had delineated them. But to develop the budget I needed a more precise itinerary, and that had to come from him. For several weeks I had tried unsuccessfully to reach him by phone. I began to believe that perhaps his restlessness had gotten the best of him, and he had already started off on some adventure. I continued as best I could, going over the foundation materials I had brought back from New York and outlining some hypothetical treks and approximating their associated costs. This budget, I knew, would have to stop far short of Mad Bear's imagined caravan of dark green jeeps. I was beginning to realize that my assignment would not be an easy one. It would not be as simple for me to communicate this cause to potential funders as it had been for Mad Bear to communicate it to me, to the traditional chiefs, or to his colleagues at the convention. As I continued my deliberations in the absence of Mad Bear, I needed someone with whom to talk over my thoughts, and Masayuki Watanabe, a new addition to our Japanese family community, offered an accommodating ear. He had recently completed a cross-country tour on an excursion bus pass and had moved in next door for a brief stay before returning to Japan. Masayuki was articulate and innovative, and as we discussed the project, his interest grew. He was at a time of freedom and independence in his life, and he was available for any interesting adventure. And together we became convinced that this project needed an in-field research assistant such as he. He would get along handsomely with the native people, it seemed to me, with his long black hair, deep eyes, sculpted face, and dark skin. He appeared as likely to blend in on a native reservation as in downtown Tokyo. The prospective provided an incentive for him to extend his stay in the United States, a justification he evidently had already been hoping to find. Our discussions turned to the issue of his visa. One day in late January, Mad Bear phoned. "Doug, what's up?" he bellowed loudly. I jerked the receiver away from my ear. Then I responded almost as loudly as he, hoping to sound equally exuberant. "Hey, Mad Bear, I was trying to get a hold of you for some time ago." "I know," he said, "and here I am. You called, and here I am. How about that?" Yeah, I thought to myself, 3 weeks later. I paused to reflect. What was it I needed to go over with him? "Doug, where you at?" "Oh, sorry," I said. "I'm right here." "Well, I know that. I mean, how far am I from where you live?" "What?" "I've got your address written down right here, but I don't know the streets. We're driving so we can get to your place on our own, but you're going to have to give some instructions." Mad Bear had driven out to me. Or maybe if you're free, maybe you'd like to come on down here. I'm calling from the Native Center right here in Oakland. I got this guy traveling with me here, a young Sioux who's gonna help us out. And you can bring that Oriental friend who's helping you so we can meet him. Masayuki and I drove across town to the Native Center. I wanted to explain to Masayuki how Mad Bear was tuned in, as he himself had put it, and how he had evidently picked up on our arrangement, though I had not told him of anyone helping me. I had not even had the chance to talk with him since before I had met Masayuki. But I decided not to tell Masayuki too much too fast. When we met at the Native Center and introductions were made, Mad Bear related to Masayuki as though he had been part of the picture all along, and neither explanations nor confirmations were ever needed. Not for Masayuki or for Mad Bear. Well, looks like we got a little two-car caravan here anyways. Mad Bear chuckled as they jumped into his Toyota Land Cruiser to follow us back to our place. The moment we arrived, Mad Bear was through the front door as though he knew the place. He settled himself into the largest chair with a sigh and looked very much at home. Well, I figured I might as well hit the road, he said, settling back and looking pleased with himself. And get away from the worst of the cold. Winter's pretty heavy back up home this year, and I've got to chop my own wood, you know. Anyways, I was getting restless, didn't I tell you? I told you that back home, right? How soon do you guys think we'll actually be ready for us to get started? Mad Bear and the 24-year-old Sioux native from Samu Haut's ranch stayed with us for several days, and the four of us spent the whole time working out the details and plans for the project. But how soon? My question was how much and how could we get it? I personally would have been willing to set out without any itinerary at all. I would have felt alright just to go as the wind blows, as the medicine men would say, to simply follow Mad Bear around and to trust his spontaneous intuition. But in any case, we needed funds to get anywhere at all. And for that, we needed a proposal. I knew that the standard procedure was to be as specific as sure of both the plans and the outcome as if our purpose had already been accomplished. And I doubted that we could include anything about spontaneous intuition and going as the wind blows. Since Mad Bear had already made 2 preliminary scouting trips across the country, and since he was now here, we felt we could come up with a 30-day itinerary to make a competent-sounding presentation. I had a half-dozen acquaintances in the Bay Area who knew more than I about the ins and outs of grant writing, and they had volunteered to help us work on our proposal and to help launch the fundraising part of the project. They wanted to meet with Mad Bear because he might be helpful in supplying some of the specifics that were required. Together, we prepared a biographical sketch and a job description for each of the 4 of us and sketched out our first 30-day itinerary. We began preparations for 2 grant proposals to be sent to the foundations. One was to be for the full 6-month project, and one was for the 30-day field research phase, which we called the pilot study. Mad Bear appeared to feel uncomfortable with the use of our words like research and study, but I knew these words were useful in an application for funding, and he had seemed to approve of our new name, Cross-Cultural Studies Program. He had, in fact, been the one to suggest something institutional sounding. Still, in all his elaboration about this work, he had always spoken of communication and sharing, and offering on the part of his people on their understanding of global events. He had never mentioned the word research. There appeared to be a difference in the way some of us were viewing this project. It seemed to me that this issue ought to be discussed, now that we were all sitting here with Mad Bear. Those of us who were working on the proposal needed to be able to present a true picture of our purpose and our process. I think there's an important distinction, I said, in our intended methodology here. I think we need to make it clear that this is not just another pedantic probing into some bizarre culture. This is not our culture sorting and selecting data in its usual habitual way. Rather, this is a process of simply listening and assimilating, of observing and recording what these people choose among their various tribes and traditions to communicate to us. It's like they have offered us some contribution, a way of understanding that this is not part of our own culture, and we're setting out to receive it. But our friends here were thinking about credibility. Potential supporters might think that what we could gather regarding native records and prophecy would sound like unsubstantiated claims. Everyone would be interested in verification, and we had best try to make our reports believable enough to attract further support. There are so many conflicting opinions, they pointed out, among so-called scholars regarding the arrival of the first humans upon this continent, about who arrived from where and when and what happened after that. Many so-called experts seem to think that Native Americans have little understanding of their own history and culture, and need to be taught about themselves by us. Even those facts regarding our Native American heritage that have been well substantiated are seldom taught and are little known. It seemed to our group that there were already so many conflicting and confusing opinions about the native people that evidence and validation ought to be at least a part of our goal. Listen, Mad Bear said, just listen. Let me explain something, and I don't mean to sound disrespectful to any scholars or experts or anyone else. The whole point of this project is that this time we are talking. I mean we, our native people, and not all the students and scholars with their opinions and judgments. This is the time for your people to hold off on their compulsive judgments and to keep them out of the way. To forget about their verifications and their conclusions until they have a chance to grow onto some real first-hand understanding. We don't need these judgments, and we don't need more students and scholars. In fact, neither do you. We've had enough of them for a while. We're not specimens here. We're not here to be studied and put into textbooks and museums. To be truthful, I couldn't care less what the so-called experts think. We want to contact and touch you people directly, not indirectly through your endless studies and reports. We want direct encounter on a personal relationship and friendship level. Let us reach out to you for once and tell you what we have in mind to say. Let us tell you our own story for once, and let us tell it in our own way. This has never happened. Not once in these hundreds of years of history since you people came over here. We once thought you people came to live with us. You still could have that chance. We're still here, and we live on this land. We don't live in your libraries in the pages of your books. This project is not for digging up our pottery, or for digging up our bones for that matter. It's not even for digging up data and statistics about us. We have a long-surviving and sacred tradition and an experimental wisdom that's been passed on for more centuries than you people can imagine. This is your chance to benefit from that. All you have to do is be quiet and listen and quit worrying about proving and believing. I want this to happen because this is still our home and you are our guests here. And because you still do not understand our home and you are spoiling it. No one responded. No one said anything. In the long silence that followed Mad Bear's words, people began to shuffle papers and to look through their notes. It was not that anyone had failed to understand what Mad Bear had said. There was the question of the implications and of how this might be expressed in grant proposal terms. There was the question, so what do we do now? But no one spoke it out loud. What I learned from Mad Bear's words were the implications for our new cross-cultural studies program. We retained the name, and its ongoing stance and strategy. Cross-cultural study was indeed a goal, but studies in a different sense than I had ever observed in my lifetime. We had always been saying, never judge the old native until you have walked 100 miles in his moccasins. That was a native concept, not a concept I had witnessed among my own people. In Mad Bear's view, one can understand another only from the perspective of the other and not from one's own. To properly study an eagle, one must endeavor to know not how the eagle appears to the observer, but how the observer appears to the eagle. So we set out to put ourselves in the place and in the position that we might receive some useful knowledge from this ancient culture and pass it on to our own. This idea was extremely uncomfortable, even threatening to charitable endowments who felt their financial activities were under official scrutiny. This was not apparent to us at first. Dozens of foundations identifying themselves as Native American philanthropies declined our applications, saying simply that though ours was a noble cause, it did not fit within their contributing guidelines. As, over time, we became more closely acquainted with contributors involved in Native affairs, their communications became more revealing. There were those who questioned how we had come to our glamorous illusions regarding these backward and savage people. Others conceded to us that after so many years and so many millions had been spent in the effort to destroy Native culture, they could not dare to openly assist in the support of the tradition. The persistence of that culture threatens many powerful people because of land and resource issues, we were told. Unless you can do so under some less candid pretext, you'll never be able to obtain funding. We learned that proselytization, acculturation, and subjection, what natives called genocide and what might be at least be called culturecide, remained an earnest and expensive effort. Well, it's their money, one of the advisors said, and they can do with it as they wished. Weeks passed. Madbear and his young Sioux helper had returned to their respective homes, and Madbear continued to call to inquire when we might be able to get started. One day he phoned to report on a vision he had just been alerted to. You know that place out there in Berkeley where we are expected to speak? That institute? Well, we better look in on that. Something has got to be done about that now, or it might not even be there. And that's coming up pretty quick now, right? These people up Canada way, a couple of Mohawks, they came down here and they had a vision about that place. They saw you and me sitting in front of a fireplace in a living room. The fire was going and we were giving a talk to a group of people. They described you pretty good too, and they've never seen you. But we're not going to be speaking in a house, right? I tried to tell them it was in an institute. It is an institute, I acknowledged, but it's a house with a big living room and a fireplace. I had been somewhat involved with the Institute for the Study of Consciousness. It was the Berkeley branch of the Foundation for the Study of Consciousness, created by Arthur Young, philosopher, engineer, and inventor of the Bell helicopter. I had talked with him about Madbear, and the Youngs had contributed to the Native Fund for the event at the United Nations. The program staff had invited Madbear and me to speak at the Institute in the spring, and Madbear had agreed. I had hoped to introduce them when Madbear was in the Bay Area, but the Youngs were at their center in Pennsylvania at the time, and Madbear had not seen the Berkeley Institute. That's where we'd be, I told him, there in the living room. The speakers sit up front near the fireplace, and they usually have a fire going. Well, so we're sitting there in front of the fire, Madbear said, and all of a sudden there's this big rumble, and the roof caves in, and the walls and everything. It's an earthquake, and I don't know what happens after that, 'cause then their vision expands, and they see buildings falling apart all over the place, and bridges and everything. I said nothing. I could think of no response. Our scheduled talk was nearly 2 months away. If Madbear decided to cancel, how would I possibly explain it? Well, listen to this, Madbear went on. I figured I really gotta check that one out. So we got these dreamers down here, maybe I told you, Tuscarora. They're a mother and son, pretty old, both of them. Well, the way they do, they lie side by side when they're dreaming, and they both gotta share the same dream. So when they come into the same dream, they physically clasp hands right there on the floor, and they simultaneously clasp hands in the dream. Then they have their look and they come back together and agree on what they saw. He waited for my reaction. What did they see? Chinatown. First, Chinatown in an earthquake. It caved in, just like a cone-shaped sinkhole, sank right into the ground. I knew it was Chinatown because their description was so accurate. Anyways, they couldn't pin it down as to the time. Those things you can't pin down. Could happen anytime. It all depends on how long it can be held off. That's a job that some are given, holding things off. So I says, what about this institute that the Mohawks saw? The place where we're speaking at. Wouldn't that put a time on it? They went at it again, but they couldn't see it. They found the place all right, it seems like, by what you've said. They came in over the roof, dropped down right around the eaves, and right there where they clasped hands. When they woke up, they said they saw the fireplace in the living room. No one was in there when they were there. See, they were actually there. They said there's an L-shaped porch and you can see into the living room for either side. There's another thing I wanted to check with you, 'cause you know the place. That's right. There's a kind of a deck with a roof overhanging it, and it's an L-shaped with a window on either side. Well, they went to the right place, sure enough. Course, in that trip they didn't see the roof cave in, but then they didn't see us there either. It's a question of when it is, so they went back yet again. They said they clasped hands and tried to push on up, way up above to get out of the time lock, but they couldn't get a view of the place with us in there. Maybe we're not going. What do you think we ought to do? Maybe we should hang out in the Sierras, this side of Sacramento. That place is safe from danger and we can watch over everything. I tried to picture myself telling my friends at the Institute that they were likely to be crushed by an earthquake and Mad Bear had decided not to take the chance. I felt myself become suddenly irritated. I mean, cancel I guess, to escape any risk. I guess it's every man for himself in a case like that. I regretted the way I put it. It's not a matter of saving our own necks, he responded. It's a matter of being aware and being hopeful. You get caught off guard and you lose your intentionality. I'll tell you what, you figure it out for yourself. I'm gonna take a little dream medicine, okay, and I'm gonna look into this. But this time, you're gonna do it too. Whatever you do, in your own way, you do it. You come up with something so you're not left empty. Then you let me know and we'll talk again. So I'll say so long for now. Abruptly, he hung up. All right, I thought, I'll do it. I can do that. I don't have any dream medicine. I'll just dream. But in spite of my bedtime resolve, I either received no pertinent dreams or I forgot them upon awakening. I decided that what I was looking for would not come in my sleep, and over several days, I spent hours in a deliberate effort to inquire within. I was barraged with images. I pictured Mad Bear the first time I saw him, with his shiny Hawaiian shirt and his tipped cigar, sitting there with rolling thunder in the Berkeley Hills, talking about floods and earthquakes and natural disasters. I recalled how so many trees were bowed over and how Mad Bear had pointed them out to me, saying that they were bending toward the earth in fear and despair. I recalled him saying how some natives, despite knowing it's not right, as he had put it, now prayed for earthquakes and the destruction that the transition might be hastened, the earth cleansed and a new world ushered in. But I suppose my thoughts were self-induced, and I learned nothing from myself about roofs and walls and bridges caving in or what we had best do. After several days, I decided I'd let it go. Prophetic visions were not my work. Still, Mad Bear's words echoed in my memory. It's a matter of being aware. You get caught off guard and you lose your intentionality. But that's exactly what Mad Bear wanted to lecture about, I thought, and now he wants to cancel. He hadn't said that exactly, but I knew he would. I felt a rush of indignation. So what if a few dreamers could foresee enough to save their own skins? Most people will never know. If an earthquake comes, they'll not know in advance, and afterwards, they'll never know what hit them. At least, they'll never understand. We've been told we destroyed the natural balance. Some have said that nature will fight back, that natural disasters are inevitable. It will be like a giant hand reaching down to crush people, and they'll never have sufficient warning nor sufficient understanding why. We do care, came the response. I had been pacing in agitation, and was suddenly overcome by a feeling of solace. I looked around. I was fully awake, and I heard something quite distinctly. We are those who care. It felt like a group speaking in chorus and with very evident compassion. It was though some external scanner had found a frequency inside of me and had locked in on it. I simply listened. Those who care deeply and strongly, and blame is beside the point with us. We do not define the work as the meting out of just desserts. For those who would seek to find an adversary, we long for a wider and more thorough view. And for those who fear, we long for peace. It went on, and it was not a deliberate pondering or thought process. It was not I. It was like dictation, I thought, and perhaps I ought to write it down. I took a pen and paper and tried to write from memory, but other thoughts interfered. For one thing, I began to wonder, how could those words have anything to do with the revelation, or whatever, that Madbear had expected me to come up with? Well, it was what I got, and perhaps all I was likely to get. This sort of phenomenon was not a part of my own practice. So I sat down at my typewriter and held my fingers on the keys. If you want me to get what you just said, I spoke out loud, say it again. It came again, just as before, and I typed it. I took dictation. I read it over several times, and I decided that I appreciated having it. It was a helpful and reassuring response to my state at the moment. But I still doubted it was the information Madbear had requested. That last sentence was rather like advice and seemed relevant, in a sense. Jump, they had said, jump free of the sense of peril and fear. Hold hands together and jump up onto the level of heart. But how, I wondered, would Madbear take it should I decide to repeat those words to him? He would be on the phone again, and I would have something to say. The next time Madbear phoned, I brought up the matter myself before he had a chance to question me. I briefly paraphrased the entire paragraph and concluded, "So that's about all." "Great," he said. "Maybe that's the important part. That's got to be included. We can't control how it's received by others, the same as we can't control what becomes of any knowledge. That's not up to us, though we have it to gather it up and put it out. But that part about no blame and about the heart level, we can't leave that out. That's the fourth world." Then he changed the subject. It seemed to me that he was perhaps intending to appear at the Institute in Berkeley after all. He and I entitled our spring topic, "The Emergence of the Fourth World." Our endeavors to initiate our project continued. Throughout several weeks of correspondence, meetings, and telephone conversations, we heard things like, "If only you were helping to lead these people to Christianity," or "You should be helping these people take advantage of what the modern life has to offer." One San Francisco foundation seemed intrigued with the idea of funding a cross-tribal communication from traditional native peoples. But they opted instead to pay for an 18-wheeler for some organization thinking to distribute surplus food to pickup points along reservation roads. One of the foundation staff remarked to us, "If we can't see our way to help their culture survive, after all that's been done to stifle it, at least we can help feed them. But just between us, we could do better than simply keeping them on the dole." After what Madbear convinced us was an unnecessary amount of time spent in futile endeavor, we finally set out to begin our pilot project, with a bank loan co-signed by some of our colleagues. Masayuki and I flew to New York to meet Madbear. He wanted us to get together with representatives of several Southwest tribes, and also to examine the rock ridings in southern Arizona near the Mexican border. Madbear needed to make the cross-country trip in his Toyota Land Cruiser so that it would be available for our travels in the Southwest. He also needed to find someone to replace the young Sue, who had been unable to hang around while we pursued our funding. So Masayuki and I flew out to Tucson to wait for the next rendezvous. As soon as we were settled in our temporary quarters, we notified the Tucson Native Center as instructed, and Madbear had no problem finding us. Though I suspected he could have psyched us out in any case. He introduced us to his young companion. "Here's our assistant and co-pilot. He's from way up north, Mohawk Nation." Then, as usual, he marched right on in, picked a chair, and made himself comfortable. "Why, this is just like Uptown," he remarked, "pretty doggone snazzy." "Well, based on their weekly rates, this seemed about the most reasonable place for the four of us," I explained. "Well, we don't need it," Mad Bear replied. "One thing, I found a place near the Indian Center, which is where we better be. It's cheap, yet they have a jacuzzi too. Now you can't beat a deal like that. Another thing, if I'm going to be in Tucson, it's going to be South Tucson. That's where the real people are. Latinos, natives, everybody. Anyways, we'll be pretty quick heading down toward the border there, on down to the reservation, which is where we're really supposed to be." So we relocated to the place of Mad Bear's choice, and he was in the jacuzzi before the rest of us had finished unloading his vehicle. "Better jump on in here and soak up some wetness," he urged when we looked in on him. "'Cause in about an hour or so, we'll be all sitting out under that desert sun." In the heat of the late afternoon, we and more than a dozen Papago natives were gathered around picnic tables among the cacti and saguaros just east of Tucson. Mad Bear made sure that we were personally introduced to each and every one of them. There was no way to remember all these names and who was related to whom, but Mad Bear wanted to generate the impression that we were all supposed to become great friends. Everyone was cheerful and playful, full of laughter and kindness. Then Mad Bear made his speech and everyone became silent and stoic, except for the young ones who had no idea what he was talking about and soon jumped up to run about again. Mad Bear's speech sounded like a rally. He spoke of getting back to the spiritual tradition and of the new, urgent responsibilities of native peoples. It is time for intertribal unity, time to stop quarreling and complaining, to regain the rightful role of spiritual leadership for the sake of the land and the life, and time, therefore, to give up alcohol completely, to give up that which has been holding the people down. There was no visible reaction. People accepted him as spokesman, it seemed to me, but there was no way to tell whether they approved of his words. Perhaps, I thought, some may have been taking his words as critical of them. Mad Bear seemed pleased, however, as we drove back to the motel in the sunset. "They all agreed," he said, "and they all agree with what we're doing. They even offered us the use of a cabin down there on the reservation. Remember that old white-haired lady with her 2 sons? She has a little cabin away out there in the canyon near the Mexican border. It'll be just right for us." He turned to look back from us from his driver's seat and gave Masayuki a wide grin. "I know you'd rather be out in that canyon than hanging out there in this motel," he said. "I know you've been waiting to get out there on the res." "Well, you're gonna love it. Why, you can walk out in the dark any night and suddenly throw a flashlight beam anywhere on the ground. And you can count 2 scorpions, 2 tarantulas, 3 black widows, and a rattlesnake right there in your light beam." "I don't really like snakes and spiders too much," Masayuki whispered to me. Mad Bear laughed. "Of course, we'll be keeping one of these rooms here in town," he allowed, "so we can alternate back and forth between the snakes and the jacuzzi." We spent most of the next day gathering supplies in town to take out to the cabin. Mad Bear had invited everyone out for our very first night for a great big pot of his famous menudo. As always, he was in the very best of humor, as he went about the very wonderful business of shopping for food. "I keep thinking about so many snakes and spiders," Masayuki confided in me, "and I don't like to eat that menudo very much. Maybe we're better to stay in the motel." "There aren't really that many snakes and spiders," I assured him, "and we may not even see any. They don't chase people down, after all. The best way to eat that menudo is to don't look at it and don't inhale. We'll be okay." That's the end of Chapter 7. Nyama to all for listening. Thank you.